ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಜಯಸಿಂಹ ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಆಯ್ತಾರ. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇನ್ನೇನು ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಆಗೋದಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಮಾಡಲಿಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವಿಶೇಷ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರು ಮತ್ತು ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯ ಉಪಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಅವರು ವೇದಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಅಲಂಕರಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಲಿ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ 3:30 ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುವಂಥದ್ದು ಒಂಥರ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಆದರೆ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕರ ಸಮಯ ಈಗ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ 3:30 ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ 3:30 ಹಿರಿಯರಿಗೆಲ್ಲ ಊಟದ ನಂತರ ವಿಶ್ರಾಂತಿ ಸಮಯ. ಆ ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ತಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಕರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗೊಟ್ಟು ಬಂದಿರೋದು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಸಂತೋಷ ಸಂಗತಿ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಮೊದಲು ನಿಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಬಯಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಈ ವಿಶೇಷ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ದಾರಿಯಾಗಿದ್ದು ಜೈನ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುದರ್ಶನ್ ಅವರು ಈ ಥರ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜವೇದಮ್ ಅವರು ಬರ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡೋದಾದರೆ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದರು. ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಸಂತೋಷದಿಂದ ಆಡಳಿತ ಮಂಡಳಿ ಇಲ್ಲ ಖಂಡಿತ ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ನಿಶ್ಚಯ ಮಾಡ್ತು. ಪ್ರಾರಂಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡ್ವಿ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನ 3:30 ಕಷ್ಟ, ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಮ್ಮ ಸ್ಟುಡಿಯೋಲಿ ಆಹ್ವಾನಿತ ಒಂದು 10-15 ಜನ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರನ್ನ ಕರೆದುಬಿಟ್ಟು ಸ್ಟುಡಿಯೋಲಿ ಮಾಡಿ ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಯೂಟ್ಯೂಬಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕೋಣ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ. ಅದಾದ ನಂತರ ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರು ಬರ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಸೆಂಟರ್ನೆಯ ಸಭಾಂಗಣದಲ್ಲೇ ಆಗಲಿ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಮತ್ತೆ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಡಿ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ವಾಟ್ಸಪ್ ಮೂಲಕ ಮತ್ತು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಮೂಲಕ ಆಹ್ವಾನವನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಒಳ್ಳೆಯ ಸಂಖ್ಯೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಮಿಸಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವಿಶೇಷ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕರಾಗಿ ಬಂದಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಾನು ಆತ್ಮೀಯವಾದ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಬಯಸ್ತೇನೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಉಪಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾದ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಮೈಸೂರಿನ ಪದ್ಧತಿ ಮಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಹಾರ ಅದನ್ನು ಹಾಕಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಸಂತೋಷ ಸಂಗತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಉಲ್ಲೇಖ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರು ಅಮೇರಿಕಾದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿನವರೇ. ಅವರು ಓದಿದ್ದು ಬಾಲ್ಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾಭ್ಯಾಸ ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲೇ ಆಯಿತು. ಸೆಂಟ್ ಜೋಸೆಫ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ PUC ಶಿಕ್ಷಣವನ್ನು ಮುಗಿಸಿದರು. ಅದಾದ ನಂತರ ಮಂಡ್ಯದ ಕಾಲೇಜಿನಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ವಿದ್ಯಾಭ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ಮುಗಿಸಿದರು. ಅದಾದ ನಂತರ ಟಾಟಾ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಸ್ನಾತಕೋತ್ತರ ಪದವಿಯನ್ನು ಪಡೆದರು. ಅದಾದಮೇಲೆ ಇವರು ಅಮೇರಿಕಾಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಕಲ್ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ವಿಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಒರೆಗಾಂವ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯಿಂದ PhD ಪಡೆದರು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ವಿದ್ಯಾಭ್ಯಾಸ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗಲ್ಲೇ PhD ಮಾಡಿ ಅದಾದ ನಂತರ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣದ ಆಧಾರದಲ್ಲೇ ಸುಮಾರು 26 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ಕಾಲ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವಿದ್ಯುತ್, ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಿಕಲ್ ಡಿಪಾರ್ಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್, ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನಿಕ್ ಡಿಸೈನ್, ಆಟೋಮೇಷನ್, ಆಯಿಲ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಗ್ಯಾಸ್, ಈ ರೀತಿ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ವಿಭಾಗಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಅನೇಕ ಪೇಟೆಂಟ್ ಕೂಡ ಇವ್ರ ಹೆಸರಲ್ಲಿ ದಾಖಲಾಗಿವೆ. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಅಪ್ಲೈಡ್ ಮ್ಯಾಥಮೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಇವರು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಇವರ ಅನೇಕ ಲೇಖನಗಳು ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಮತ್ತು ಅಂತಾರಾಷ್ಟ್ರೀಯ ಜರ್ನಲ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ಪ್ರಬಂಧಗಳು ಇವ್ರದ್ದು ಪ್ರಕಟ ಆಗಿವೆ. ಅಪ್ಲೈಡ್ ಮ್ಯಾಥಮೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್, ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್, ಆಲ್ಗರಿಥಮ್ಸ್, ಕಂಪ್ಯೂಟರ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಈ ವಿಷಯಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಅವರು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಗತಿಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ತಮ್ಮ ಆಸಕ್ತಿಯನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡ್ರು. ಆರ್ಕಿಯೋಜೆನೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್, ಆಸ್ಟ್ರಾನಮಿಕ್ ಮತ್ತು ಆರ್ಕಿಯಾಲಜಿ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಸಂಗತಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಆಸಕ್ತಿಯಿಂದ ಅವರು ಆ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಪರಿಣತಿಯನ್ನು ಪಡೆದರು. ಎವಿಡೆನ್ಸ್ ಬೇಸ್ಡ್ ಹಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ಅಂತೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ ನಾವು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನ, ಆ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಅಧ್ಯಯನವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಪಾಂಡಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಪಡೆದುಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಜೊತೆಗೇ ಇವರು ಬ್ಯಾಬಿಲೋನಿಯನ್, ಗ್ರೀಸ್, ಈಜಿಪ್ಟ್, ರೋಮ್, ಚೈನಾ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಯಾವುದು ಪುರಾತನ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿಗಳಿತ್ತು ಅವುಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಇವರು ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಅಧ್ಯಯನವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈ ರೀತಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಅಧ್ಯಯನವನ್ನು ನಡೆಸಿದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರು ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ನಾಲೆಡ್ಜ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್, ಭಾರತೀಯ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ವಿಶೇಷವಾಗಿ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡಿ ಈ ವಿಷಯಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಅವರು ಜೊತೆ ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆಯಿಂದ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು. ಹಣ ಸಂಪಾದನೆಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಷೇತ್ರ, ಭಾರತದ ವಿಷಯ ಮತ್ತು ಇತಿಹಾಸ, ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಈ ರೀತಿ ಸಂಗತಿಗಳು ನನ್ನ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೇನಾದರೂ ನಾನು ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷ ಸುಮಾರು 2 ಸರಿ ಬಂದು ಭಾರತದ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಪಟ್ಟಣಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳನ್ನು ಮತ್ತು ಶಿಕ್ಷಕರಿಗೆ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗ್ ಕೊಡುವಂಥ ಕೆಲಸ ಕೂಡ ಮಾಡ್ತಾಯಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದರು. ಇವರು ಮದ್ರಾಸಿಗೆ ಬಂದು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿ ನೂರಾರು ಶಿಕ್ಷಕರಿಗೆ ಟ್ರೈನಿಂಗನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಾರೆ. ಇವತ್ತು ಬೆಳಗ್ಗೆ PES ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಲಿ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಇತ್ತು, ಅದು ಮುಗಿಸಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದಾದ ನಂತರ ಜೈನ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಲಿ ಸಂಜೆ 6:30 ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಇದೆ. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ, ತಾಯ್ನಾಡಿಗೆ ನನ್ನದೇನಾದರೂ ಕೊಡುಗೆ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ತುಡಿತಾ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಹಿರಿಯ ವಿದ್ವಾಂಸರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ನಾನು ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಈಗ ಅವರು ವಿಸಿಟಿಂಗ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕಲ್ಟಿಯಾಗಿ ಹಿಂದೂ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಆಫ್ ಅಮೇರಿಕಾ, ಫ್ಲಾರಿಡಾ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗೇ ಅಡ್ವೈಸರಿ ಕೌನ್ಸಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಧರ್ಮ ಸಿವಿಲೈಸೇಷನ್ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಕ್ಯಾಲಿಫೋರ್ನಿಯಾ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಅವರು ಮಾರ್ಗದರ್ಶಕರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಆರ್ಷವಿದ್ಯಾ ಕೇಂದ್ರಂ ಕೊಯಂಬತ್ತೂರು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಸಂದರ್ಶಕ ಪ್ರಾಧ್ಯಾಪಕರಾಗಿ ಕೂಡ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಈ ರೀತಿ ಬಹುಮುಖ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿತ್ವದ ಮತ್ತು ಭಾರತೀಯ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಇತಿಹಾಸದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಮ್ಮದೇ ಆದ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಪಾಂಡಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಕರೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಕೊಟ್ಟು ಇವತ್ತು ಬಂದಿರುವಂಥದ್ದು ತುಂಬ ಸಂತೋಷ ಸಂಗತಿ. ನಾನು ಮತ್ತೆ ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷವೂ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಸರಿ ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಗೆ ಬರಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಡ್ಲಿ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಬಯಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ವೇದಿಕೆ ಮೇಲೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕೊಟ್ರೇಶ್ ಅವರು ತುಮಕೂರು ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಹಿರಿಯ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಅವರು ಮತ್ತು ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯ ಉಪಾಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಬಯಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಂ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಶೇಷ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನು ಪ್ರಾರಂಭಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಯ ಪರವಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ತೇನೆ.
It's a real pleasure to come here to Mythic Society and obviously to visit my hometown, Bangalore. So it's a real pleasure and it's a privilege to come here. So thank you very much. And I'm truly happy that you all come here on this afternoon to hear this talk. Once again, thank you very much for that. And Mythic Society, truly grateful for you for inviting me here. So let me embark on this right away. So the title of the talk today is Aryan Invasion or Migration Theory, and the focus that my host asked was to talk about recent findings. But I can't talk only about recent findings, so I placed it in context, so hopefully it will make some sense over here. Oh, come on, okay. So before I start, Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We, in our civilization, we pay citation to our gurus and our teachers. At the very top are the gurus who have inspired me, and the teachers of yesterday whose works we rely on today, and our present day teachers and hundreds of others whose works we rely on and build our knowledge on. So my pranams to everybody. So to set the context, I always start with talking about the unsatisfactory historiography of India. Who wrote the history of India and why did they do it the manner that they did? Very important to understand this, and I call this the frameworks that people have imposed. At the very beginning, we had the colonial perspective. When the colonial people came to India, they wanted to write the history of India for the civil servants. So they came with the idea that Indians are backward, primitive, stagnant, superstitious society, and the Europeans are forward, progressive, technologically advanced, and that kind of society. So they wrote the history of India in a certain way. They were followed by the Eurocentric people who wanted to answer, why is Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek related? What is the relationship between these languages? In order to answer that question, they went about with several notions, and a lot of Eurocentric ideas came into the picture, and they wrote the history in a certain way. Wherever colonials went, the missionaries were not far behind. So they wanted to convert the Indians into Christianity. So they were at the forefront of translating the Sanskrit literature, whether it's the Puranas, Itihasas, and so on, into European languages, German, English, and so on. So they came with a certain lens to make Indians look like primitive people and believing in superstitious business and things of that nature. And since 1947, we have unfortunately inherited Nehruvian socialism. So this has come with its own bias, a leftist kind of bias into the discourse. We can talk about that presently. And since 1972, we have also had the Marxist thinking into the picture. So while these forces were interested in a certain way of looking at India, these two forces were interested in addressing the past as primitive. It has to be jettisoned for progress. And only when you throw the past away, then you can have a future utopian classless society. So the tendency for these last two forces is to look at all of Indian social dynamics in terms of oppressor-oppressed. Everything is reduced to oppressor-oppressed. Gone is your Vedanta, gone is your philosophy, gone are the lovely accomplishments of civilization. Everything is reduced to who oppressed whom, who is a victim, and these kinds of things. And they believe by throwing away the old order, in India the old order is Hinduism, by throwing it away, we can bring a classless society. These people think that change can come through democratic processes, meaning that through the constitution, you write laws, unequal laws, and things of that nature. These people believe in a bloody revolution. That's what is going to change the picture. Anyway, these five forces have hijacked the history of India, imposed their ideologies, and led to a subversion of our identity in the present. So most of us are utterly brainwashed, indoctrinated in this kind of thinking. We cannot connect to the ancient civilization that India has been. Each of us are indoctrinated in various ways, and we espouse these values because this is what blares at us, whether it is on the media, in public spaces, whether it is in the Constitution, and elsewhere, history textbooks. This is what we learn. Very unfortunate. So this summarizes that over the last 300 years, we had the colonial missionaries, Eurocentric scholars in what I call the colonial hegemony, people like Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, and hand in hand with Christian imperialism, people like Caldwell, G.U. Pope, and others. They brought about the idea that Hinduism is a post-flood religion. We are referring to Noah's flood here, which is what they believed in. Happened in 2500 BC according to Christian genealogy, and they believed that all of humankind history is a history of Noah's progeny, and they tried to impose that on India. They presented Indians as a caste-ridden society. Indians only had Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. That is what we always have in any part of India, Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. However, they invented something called caste based on their experiences in Americas. So kasta was imported into India, and we were force-fed into the so-called caste framework, and they imposed on us, calling us a caste-ridden society. They also brought about the idea that some people called Dravidians were oppressed people. In India, we only know something called Dravida. Dravida is the southern part of India, referred to in Kumarila Bhatta's Tantravartika, Adi Shankara, Saundarya Lahiri. All these works talk about Dravida in the context of geographical space. However, Caldwell, he introduced the English word Dravidian, referring to the southern Indians as if they were a separate race. So those distortions have crept in that manner. And on this side, the Eurocentric scholars, they brought about the notion that Sandrakutos, who's found in Megasthenes Indica, is the same as Chandragupta Maurya, by doing that phonetic association that distorted the true chronology of India. The Purana chronology of India puts Chandragupta Maurya to 1200 BCE. But because of this association, that entire chronology was brought down to 300 BCE. So they introduced distortions that way. And for Sanskrit, they proposed it was a daughter language of something they called Proto-Indo-European languages, an ancestral language from whom has come all the daughter languages of Europe as well as Sanskrit. That's why the relation according to them. They also brought about the notion of Aryans. In India, we only know about Arya. Arya is a noble person, an honorific given to a person who is of dharmic disposition, given to dharmic kind of ideas. And in the same context in Mahabharata, we have Dushasana, who's called Anarya because of his role in disrobing Draupadi. He's called an Anarya and not a noble person. However, William Jones, he introduced the idea of Aryans, that people were a race called Aryans. Instead of Arya as a honorific, it was converted into a people called Aryans. So they got Aryans in India in 1500 BC as a consequence of these ideas. They refer to Harappa as an isolated civilization, nothing connected with the later Indian civilization, or sometimes that they are the Dravidian people. And they also brought in the idea that there are two language families in India. Till that time, nobody in India thought that we have two language families, but they brought in the idea, Indo-European and the so-called Dravidian languages. And the Eurocentric people with linguistics, anthropology, and caste brought in these kind of notions, 1700s to present. With convergent ideologies, they came about the idea of Aryan invasion migration theory. And if we think that these are all relics of the past, it is no longer relevant today. Unfortunately, that's not true. What we see is Aryan migration invasion is a received wisdom for our academia. Our academia will not question what they've got from the colonialists. So this lens, this way of looking at the Indian civilization has been inherited by them. And they also use outsider sociology, sociology that is appropriate for the Western experience. The West had slavery for 1700 years at least, and they have had world wars. They have had a whole lot of problems with oppression of women and all of those kinds of things. So they have had social movements like communism, like Marxism, like postmodernism, like modernism, colonial studies, post-colonial. All that is relevant for their experience. However, our academia has imported these alien lenses and imposed it on India. So the angry white male is relevant in the European experience, has become the angry Brahmin male in India, however ill-fitting that might be. Unfortunately, that's what is done. And they use archaeology today, people like Maria Gimbutas, Colin Linfraw, their works to align with Aryan Dravidian ideas. And today we also have genetics, which is made to align with the linguistics chronology, and they all, with circular dependencies and questionable assumptions, once again have a direct impact on who you are as a person, what is the identity of people in this civilization. All that is impacted and reinforced, the old ideas reinforced by these kind of thinkings. So I've given a big graphic over here to show the kind of frameworks. It looks cartoonish, but this is the underlying idea over here. So we have the colonial Eurocentric missionary people whose underlying idea Christianity is only true religion and the superiority of white Europeans. They wanted to uphold the Bible chronology, show Hindus as backward, primitive, superiority of white Europeans, and promoting Christianity, obviously. And socialist academia and Marxist, by destroying Hinduism, can get a classless utopian society. So that is their outlook. And they have subaltern studies, history from below, oppressor-oppressed conflict dynamics, and they soften Islam's blow, show class conflicts and claim victimhood. Today you have a deracinated framework in Tamil Nadu, where you have Dravidianism, where they also want to show themselves as distinct from Hindus, and they are presenting Hindus in this manner. They promote Christianity, hand in hand with Christianity, and show victimhood, that they are victims of the Aryan oppression and things of this nature. And two more frameworks have arisen today in the West and also making its presence felt in India, where you have Islamism and the leftism who join forces, and you have wokeism coming out of that, which also shares the same ideology. As you can see, all these frameworks have convergent ideas, and that is why the narrative is so difficult to change, because there's enormous amounts of money going to reinforce these kind of thinkings. So moving forward, why should we care about it? Why should we care about it today? Well, according to them, they say that Aryan invasion happened in 1500 BC when illiterate nomads from Central Asia, they invaded India and destroyed a superior civilization. Not my words. This is what your children learn in NCERT textbooks. So these are words from NCERT textbooks. India had to wait for another 1,000 years for civilization to return to Magadha after the Greeks made contact with Magadha. So the Greeks had their own script and they brought in the Brahmi script. Suddenly India got Brahmi script, Ashokan edicts and all those things. We became civilized overnight according to them. And there's not enough time for knowledge generation in math, astronomy, medicine. Therefore, if you got superior works like Surya Siddhanta, Charaka Samhita, Shushruta Samhita and things of this nature, you must have learnt it from older civilizations. Think people like the Babylonians, Greeks, they must have taught you. That's how you got it. So that is a narrative out there. And they say the Brahmi script came from Aramaic, from Levant into India. Aryans brought Sanskrit into India from Central Asia. Astronomy came from Babylonians. Math and sciences came from Greece. The Turkic Muslims, they got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, civilization. The British got us science, technology, and rational thought. There are even people who say Bhakti came to us from St. Thomas, who landed in Bucharest and taught us how to love of the divinity and things of this nature. And Dravidians are the Elamite people, according to the Dravidian Christian movement. So these are the kind of ideas that are in the discourse today. And so you see there's a denial of agency. We don't have the agency to narrate our history. The minute we say that, they pigeonhole us as Hindutva or fascist or saffron ideology, because they are unable to address the facts that we raise. The next best thing is to either ignore you or pigeonhole you so they don't have to address what you're saying. So that is the kind of tactics they use. But this has led to gross distortion of our identity and growing divisive forces based on these spurious ideologies. There is a criminal distortion of the history of Indian civilization, all the anchor points of our chronology, and every aspect of our knowledge systems is impacted by this. If we are happy with the status quo, we might as well get up, drink some coffee, and go home. But if you're not happy with the status quo, yeah, let's listen to what exactly is going on over here. So I, as an engineer and a scientist, I try to bring in a rational discourse over here. No longer do we go with an opinion of some heavyweight over there who's saying this is the sociological model that I have or lens that I have. We want to make a framework based on evidence with rational logical analysis of data, models, methods, frameworks, claims. That's what we do in any kind of analytical work. And I say there's so much of data for history, whether it's archaeology, genetics, climate records, astronomy, religion, anywhere you go in India, anything you show me, I will show how it is connected to a data connected to the deep civilization of India. I can show you that. So anyway, we got a lot of data, no doubt about that. That data, we can do some provenance on the kind of data. Where did it come from? Is it high quality data? Is it medium quality data? Low quality data? Yes, we might have data all over the place. But at any rate, we can take this data and use it in various models. Models are our attempt to capture reality. When we see some phenomena, we propose with our imagination a hypothesis saying that this is the way the input goes, this is the way the output comes, and the model describes that behavior. So we've got models that are based on semantics, models that are based on mathematics, models that are based on logic, various kinds of models are there. In this case, we work with linguistics model, archaeology, genetics, astronomy, several other models. We use that to describe the phenomena, and I teach all these models: linguistics model, textual model, archaeological, genetics, astronomy, southern model, and we use all of these things to understand an evidence-based understanding of the deep history of the Indian civilization. So how a theory took root. We are going to talk about linguistics, archaeology, and the so-called Aryans. How exactly did these things come about? Well, like I said, William Jones, he was a founder of the Asiatic Society, and he found common roots between Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek, and he was the first person to propose there must have been an Aryan invasion into India. And ever since he found this connection, Europeans wanted to know their identity. Who are they as a people, and why is their relationship with the Indians? They wanted to know that. So this led, because of similarity between languages, they proposed there must have been an ancestral language from which all these languages have come. That ancestral language is called Proto-Indo-European, and a lot of nationalist ideas went into trying to say, where did this language come from? Where is the homeland? Where are the people who spoke this language? But then initially they thought India was the homeland. But then they discovered the Mitannis and the Hittites. This is in northern Iraq, southern Turkey. They found these people who apparently had a Sanskritic kind of culture. For example, the Mitanni king, Tushratta, very close to Dasharatha, that was his name. In 1350 BCE, he had a peace treaty with the Egyptian pharaoh called Imhotep, where he said, in the name of Indra, in the name of Varuna, in the name of Ashwin twins, I promise not to attack you. Those kind of peace treaties. We have the cuneiform text in the museum that says that. So when they discovered that, they asked, how on earth is Sanskrit so far away from India over here? So they proposed maybe India's not the homeland, maybe the homeland is somewhere else. And eventually, the homeland shifted, and they proposed Central Asia with linguistic analysis and so on. Aryans had to be in India in 1500 BCE. After that, they discovered the ruins of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and suddenly it became an invasion. They said all of Rig Veda reads like a war manual, because Indra, Purandara, is a destroyer of forts. And all of Rig Veda is talking about how they destroyed the dasas, the forts, and the things. They said, here is the proof that it is an invasion. So in 1900s, it became an Aryan invasion theory from Proto-Indo-European homeland, using linguistics and architecture as their, archaeology as a way of talking about it. In 2000s, invasion has been debunked. It has become a migration theory from this homeland using linguistics, archaeology, and genetics. So let's take a look at this. What exactly is the linguistic framework? A little bit about that. So they use a method called comparative linguistics. So the idea is based on the morphology of a sound. When I say something, is the word made at the front of my mouth, or in the middle of the mouth, or the back of the throat? Where is it made? When I say ta, my tongue turns backwards and hits the top of my jaw. If I say ta, then my tongue hits the back of my teeth. If I say pa, the lips come together. So this is called the morphology of the sound. So they use cognates. Cognates are words in the same meaning. For example, in Tamil, for milk, I say pal. In Kannada, I say halu. In Telugu, I say palu. So the ha became pa, right? And the strong close of pal became palu in Telugu. So these are the cognates, and we break it up into syllables, and we try to address how did this syllable change from pa to ha, and things of that nature. So that is what they do in comparative linguistics, where they take a basket of languages, cognates are 100 words or so, and try to find relationships between them. Problem is that subjective, informal, lacks testability. Then there are a whole lot of other mathematical ways, lexicostatistics, glottochronology. The bottom line is there are some sound laws people produced. A greater than B means A is an older form of sound becoming B, and so on. For example, Grimm's law. Ba is an older form of sound, becomes ba, becomes pa, becomes fa. So these kind of ideas are proposed. There is no proof anywhere. So don't go looking for proof or logic or anything over here. People propose these things because they wanted a certain kind of theory to be fit over there. So as and when they found a counterexample, a new law was proposed to put a quick fix over that old band-aid over the old idea and do this. So this is the kind of ideas that came into the discourse. And eventually, this kind of reconstruction was done. where they say there was a Proto-Indo-European language. There is no evidence that anybody spoke this language, no epigraphy, no speakers, cultural memory, nothing. It was reconstructed, a hypothesized language from where the oldest is the Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Celtic, Italic, Hellenic, Indo-Iranian, from which we get Iranian, Indic, Sanskrit, Northern Indian languages. So this is an idealization based on comparative method. So there's not any reason we have to put any belief in this, other than this is what is being studied today. To give you a flavor for how this thing came about, I'm showing an example for PIE, the wheel. This is a famous bullock cart, right? Every village we see the bullock cart. So this is also there in Harappa, you see the same wheel over there. Any civilization or culture that has got the bullock cart has got words in that language for that technology. A word for the wheel, a word for the hub, word for the nave, for yoke, everything there's a word. You can't go to the carpenter and say, make me that thingamajig, make me that. You must have words, right, that explain that. So here are some examples. For the word, in Sanskritam it is chakra, in Latin rotum, Greek kuklos, yoke is yoga, lugam, nave, nabya, umbilicus, axle, axa or axis. So the proposed reconstruction from Proto-Indo-European is, they say there was an old word called kweklo. Okay? Any word with a star means it's not a real word. It's reconstructed in somewhere. So that reconstructed word gave way to the Proto-Indo-Iranian kekro, another reconstructed word, from which came the Sanskrit word chakra. However, the punchline is not there. The punchline is, in order to make this kind of analysis, the data came from Sanskrit. Sanskrit provided the data to make this kind of reconstruction. Then in a magical feat, they turned down the assumptions and made them into facts. And so PIE became a fact and Sanskrit became a derived fact instead of having been the primary fact. This is what we call circular reasoning in science today, right? So that is the methodology used today to do PIE reconstructions and things of this nature. Around the same period of time, the Germans were left out of the action of colonialism. Many of the marine powers, the British, the French, the Dutch had colonies in Asia and other places. The Germans are out of action, and they went about through this nationhood ideas and Aryanism. This German in 1878 suggested that Indo-Europeans are blonde, blue-eyed people, and these have become diluted and darkened where there's a foreign admixture of genes, like in India. And the question is, what in linguistics ever said somebody is blue-eyed, blonde, and so on? Nobody can say that. It's pulled out of a hat. It became a fact. People started using it as a received fact. They had dubious interpretation of passages in Vedic text to produce readings of fair, invading Aryans clashing with snub-nosed indigenous dasas. Another German, he said the blonde caused even more simplistic logic. He accepted without question original Aryans spoke Indo-Europeans were blonde people. Even in that period of time, there were some nationalist Indians like B.N. Datta, 36, who stated that Germanism arose amid the peculiar political condition of 19th century Germany. We cannot see any reason why in India we should pin our faith in it. He criticized the slave psychology of the Indian mind. Even in that period of mind, there were great Indians who were persuaded by the European, everybody in Europe was screaming. Just like today, artificial intelligence, everybody's talking about it, right? It's the biggest thing in the world right now. Just like that, in those days, linguistics was the biggest thing. Everybody who was worth something was writing papers, this, saying Aryan invasion. Even our great minds like Lokmanya Tilak, he also believed in Aryans and that come from Arctic and things like that. So Datta at that time had a sane mind, and he said that we cannot believe any of this nonsense. And going forward, please go forward. I wonder if I had to go a little more close to it. Can you just hit the next, please? Yes, I got it. So along with the PIE, the issue was, where is the homeland for the PIE speakers? And again, nationalist compulsions had them searching in Germany, in Armenia, in India, in this part of India, or in Armenia over here, or finally they settled between Caspian Sea and Black Sea. They said this is the homeland because it is equidistant from Scandinavia as well as India. Something as simplistic as that idea was used in order to propose the homeland of the so-called Aryans. And eventually, when people realized that this is a theory without much of scientific support, they try to see, can archaeology provide some support? And in archaeology, Gustav Kosiner, he tried to say changes in the ceramic record, meaning the pottery record, that indicates whether there's an influx of a foreign people into a culture. If you see in the archaeological record a new kind of pottery has come, you can suppose that new people have come. So with that idea, people started working to see if they can fuse both archaeology and linguistics. And today we have got two modern ideas, Maria Gimbutas and Coral Renfro. Maria Gimbutas in 1950s came with the step of the Kurgan hypothesis, where she said in the Central Asian grasslands, the people domesticated the wild horse. And once they domesticated the wild horse, they also got the iron sword. And with that, they got the chariot. They were able to start invading all over the place. That was her idea. She said it happened in three waves. The first wave was towards Europe, towards the Balto-Slavic area, Ukraine and others, in around 3000 BCE. Final wave was 1500 towards India. This is the so-called Aryan invasion. On the other side, Professor Colin Renfro said that it is the Anatolian hypothesis. He thought the invention of agriculture in Turkey, that was the impetus for the migration of languages and addition, 6500 BC, but several people still seem to think Kurgan is the place where this happened. Can you go to the next one, please? Okay, so this one shows over here the Kurgan step hypothesis, wherein 3500 BC between Caspian Sea, Black Sea, or the Yamnaya people. This is not the story of civilization, because at that time you see in India there's also a lot of action. Also in Sumeria, Egypt, in China, there are already people living over here. This is only a story of the European people. So by 2500 BC, they are spread to the west, becoming the corded ware in the archaeological record. This side, the Andronovo people. Here we have consolidation in Indus Valley, in Elam, and so on. By 1500 BC, they become Hittites, Babylonians, Mycenaeans, and others. And here you see the Bactria-Margiana archaeological complex, where they've entered into Sindh in India. This is the beginning of the Aryan invasion. By 500 BC, you see them entrenched in the Ganga plains, and you see the appearance of the Dravidian people over here. So this, in a nutshell, is what the Aryan invasion is all about. And much of my work has got to do with the rebuttal of this whole notion. And I have used many, many evidences, textual evidence, archaeology, genetics, climatology, geology, astronomy, and I try to employ all these to try to see evidence-based rational examination of facts to see, can we support these ideas or should we jump these ideas? And I start with a common sense idea from our text. I've thrown together several names over here at random from different geographies in India and from different chronological periods. People like Abhinav Gupta, Adi Shankara, Agatya, Randall, all the way to Yajnavalkya, Vyasa, and others. My question, common sense question is, who over here is saying that there was an invasion? Who over here is saying we lived in Central Asia, then we migrated to India? Who over here is saying we are North Indians, they are South Indians? Who over here is saying we used to live in the North, then we were chased and we came to the South? Not a single person in any geography, any chronology, absolutely no memory of anything called invasion, migration, nothing is there. However, 200 years back, the missionaries and the British put in the idea that there's an Aryan invasion, and today that's a dominant way that we look at ourselves as Aryans and Dravidians and these things. Flying in the face of evidence. This is the evidence staring at us in the face, but we don't look at it, right? So this is the first piece I'd like to show to you. The second is I'd like to quote Parjita. Parjita was a judge in British India, 1920s, and true to his profession, he would only make a statement after examining the evidence, examine the evidence, and then come about with the verdict and so on. So in his book, Indian Historical Tradition, he says the current theory is Aryan invasion. If that is true, we have to account it. The theory must face and account for the following facts and consideration. Indian tradition knows nothing whatsoever of an Aryan invasion. That's the first point. He studied all of the Indian Puranas, Itihasas, and everything. He said, where is the invasion? Where is the migration? Indian tradition has got no memory of that. He says the Northwest and Punjab are not the ancient home or veneration or special esteem. There was never a sacred ground in Punjab or Northwest India. Our sacred land has always been Varanasi in the east. So the Indian sacred lands are this side and not that side. He's referring to that. And he says so on entirely. In the end, he asks, all this copious tradition was falsely fabricated. The truth has been absolutely lost if the Aryan theory is correct. Is this probable? If all this tradition is false, why, how, whose interest was it fabricated? So he was the first person who challenged the Aryan invasion theory way back in 1920 itself. Obviously, he was drowned out in the loud noises in that era. Shrikant Telegiri is a person in our times who studied the linguistic evidence, and he found several contradictions. He said that if you say the homeland is in Central Asia, I'm sorry, there are so many contradictions. However, if you put the central homeland into northwest India and Punjab, he said all contradictions go away. So the homeland has got to be out of India. That is his contention. And he said similar things as Parjita did. Parjita also looked at the chronology of the books in the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda mandalas from 1 to 10 are not in chronological order. Some are earlier, some are later. And they say that the earlier books of Rig Veda have got knowledge of the geography to the east of the rivers, and the later books have got knowledge to the west of the Saraswati. That is what we're seeing over here. And east of Saraswati and the west of Saraswati. And so several ideas are there in which he said these things. And one more person, Kazanas, Nicholas Kazanas is a Greek scholar. He studied comparatively the divinities in India and the European divinities, ancient divinities, and he came to the idea that if there is a Proto-Indo-European language, it is so old and so far back in time, we don't have any data to reconstruct it. So he made a strong statement that all the academic publications on reconstructing PIE are utterly worthless, according to him. So very strong statement. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yes, I got it. So in that time, there was also this notion of a spurious invasion. Somehow this archaeology led to spurious invasion. Marshall was the archaeologist who studied Harappa in the early 1900s. In his work, he proposed Mohenjo-daro thrived from 3250 to 2750 BCE, ending 1000 years before the supposed arrival of the Aryans. In his paper in 1931, page 104, that is what he says. However, the mischief was done by Wheeler, the next archaeologist over there. He brought the chronology forward in time from 2500 to 1500 BCE in 1947 to make it conveniently possible for invading Aryans to have brought about the end of the cities. So as you can see, a lot of fabrication is taking place, and this is one of them that has led to this kind of work. This is from Michel Danino's paper. And around that time, a lot of embellishment too happened. Kusumbi is the father of Marxist historiography in India, and he embellished this whole thing. He said that the end of Harappa came at 1750 at the latest. The actual termination was abrupt, city set on fire, inhabitants slaughtered, and violent end like in the Sanskrit text, the victory of barbarism or a far older, superior urban culture. This is the kind of embellishment that you see over here. But eventually the invasion was challenged. So we see that P.V. Kane, 1953, he said you cannot extrapolate a man-made destruction of a city from finding skeletons in different strata of the soil, which is what George Dales, American scholar, he said even the skeletons belong to different epochs of the city. They're not the terminal layer, but at different epochs of the archaeological layer. How do you conclude an invasion from that? Then Dales also said in 64 there is no destruction level covering the latest period of city, no sign of extensive burning, no bodies of warrior clad in armor, no weapons of war, not a single bit of evidence as unconditional proof of armed conquest on the destruction supposed scale of Aryan invasion. Another scholar, Kenneth Kennedy, 1982, he said the injuries in the bones of Mohenjo-daro skeletons had healed well before death. If you chop off somebody's head or hand and he dies, our bone is not going to heal. Even after thousands of years, it shows a sharp cut. But if the bone injury has healed, that means that person survived that injury. So given that these people had attacked this whole invasion model, the goalpost changed. From invasion, it became a migration model, that Aryans must have migrated into India. Can we go to the next slide, please? I got it. No, please, previous slide. So in addition to that, Michel Danino has got some strong ideas. So he says in this work, if you download this paper and read it, he accuses people of inventing non-existent text, deliberate mistranslation, invention of non-existent archaeological evidence, distortion of archaeological evidence, basic flaws like circular reasoning, recycling racial theories, discarded ones, misquoting, blanking, and demonizing scholars who were opposed to this Aryan invasion. Very, very strong words from Danino. Next slide, please. So I'd like to also quote several other evidences that do not support the Aryan invasion. Next slide, please. The first one is the river Saraswati, right? So for a long time, it was clear that the Rig Veda is talking about a powerful Saraswati river flowing from the mountains to the ocean. But the issue is that this river seems to have dried out in 1900 BCE, more than 400 years before the supposed arrival of Aryans. If Aryans arrived in India in 1500 BCE and composed Rig Veda in India, how could they have seen a non-existent river? So when presented with this, the leftists and Marxists changed the goalpost, saying it's a mythical river. Or they said that this river is not at all in India, it is some river in Afghanistan, and on their way to India they encountered that river, that's what is the name. So these kind of nonsense was done. So a lot of scholars today have to actually say, yes, there was a river. And this is one such paper in Nature that came out in 2019, which says that, yes, there was this river. As you can see, this dotted line, the Gagar Hakra, this is parallel to today's Indus. Sutlej is feeding to the Indus today, but in the earlier days it was feeding into the Saraswati. At that time, Saraswati was a flowing river. But around 2000 BC or 1900 BC, tectonic plate movements in northern India caused the Sutlej to change course. It connected with the Indus River, starving the Saraswati River, and that ran dry after that time. That's what we have. And this paper analyzed the mica, all the minerals in the soil, and determined that yes, there was a flowing river from the glacier-fed river for 3 to 10 meters on both sides of the modern Gagar and a stretch of 300 kilometers from Pakistan. So presence of the sand is an indicator of a powerful river in the past. Additionally, they say this river had two distinct perennial phases. Perennial means flowing throughout the year. They say that it was flowing from 80,000 to 20,000 years ago in one phase, then 9,000 to 4,500 years ago. The next big piece of evidence is the settlements. We find many settlements along Saraswati, where today there's no water there. How can you have a settlement where there's no water? So that too is a powerful indicator. And this one shows to you a paper from Deccan College in 2012 and 13. So they attempted to do radiometric studies, carbon dating studies, to find out some of the antiquity of these settlements. And here you can see all these settlements along the Gagar. You can see all these are archaeological sites along which material has been recovered. And this from Megar, I just highlighted the earliest date. You can see this date is 9,300 years before present at Megar. Next slide, please. This is in Kalibangan. In Kalibangan, the oldest date is 6,700 years before present. Go to the next slide, please. In Rakigadi, it is around 6,180 years before present. Next slide. In Birana, it is around 8,350 years before present. These are all the carbon dating of material remains found in these sites that show how ancient these sites are. We're talking about 8,000 years, 9,000 years, and so on in these sites. These dates are supported by what I'll say later in astronomy as well as genetics. They collaborate these dates very well. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next is B.B. Lal, who passed away recently, one of India's respected archaeologists. At the end of his long, illustrious career, he came with the notion that there is absolutely no periodization in the cultural context of the Indian civilization. If people say there was a Harappa period, followed by a Vedic period, followed by Buddhist period, he said, I'm sorry, that evidence is not there in the material record of the archaeology. According to him, as you can see, we have the Pashupati seal, which is later on the Shiva seal, that is Mohenjo-daro, swastika. Then you see these terracotta figurines that have got the Sindoor mark. Even today some married women wear the Sindoor mark. And the Namaste pose in a terracotta figurine saying, Namaste is a Vedanta concept, saying Narayana in me is bowing to the Narayana in you. That is the concept. What is that doing in Harappa? Shivalinga and Kalibangan, several terracotta figurines showing yoga asana positions found by S.R. Rao as well as B.B. Lal in these areas. So clearly there is a cultural continuity of the civilization. Next slide, please. And this is from a paper in Journal of Archaeological Science. This came out in 2021. These researchers found 7 multi-nutritional food balls from an archaeological site. Very amazingly, it was preserved and made out of mung and other such things, cereals and such things. There are also bull figurines, copper seals and other such things showing it is a religious ceremony. And I linked it up saying that even today if we do Pindadana, we try to make footballs, right? A few footballs and keep it. So there's a cultural continuity of a practice from an ancient time to present times. Then they told us that iron, Aryans brought iron to India, Tiwari, Banerjee in 1500 BCE, But then in this time frame, in 2015, Professor K.P. Rao found iron in Gachibowli in the University of Hyderabad campus, where he found artifacts like knives and blades. Optical simulated luminescence testing got the date between 1800 to 2400 BCE, very, very ancient period of time. And this is from a paper, from a book by this Japanese professor in 2018, showing the oldest iron in India. We can see the oldest iron is Gachibowli. In Karnataka, in Kudremukh, Bhadravati area, we got iron, a lot of iron ore over there. You can see some old iron, some over here also. And if you go north, you see that the dates are even more earlier, later, like 1100 BCE, 1300 BCE, 1200 BCE, and 1200 BCE. And here are the later ones. Southern India, it is called Urukku. Urukku was the name of the iron over here. If iron had come from Aryans from northwest India, we expect the oldest specimens in the north, and the south must have newer specimens of iron. But we are seeing the reverse. This reverse, in a very interesting way, corroborates what Indian texts say about the peopling of India. What do I mean? If you were to take the Matsya Purana, or if you take the other Puranas, they say Vaivasvata Manu was a Dravida Desha king. It is from Dravida Desha that he went up to the north, Prayaga, and through his children, Ikshvaku and Ila, they formed the Solar dynasty and Lunar dynasty. And the Ailas were the progeny from Ila. They are the ones who peopled all over India. If you go to Hastinapura, Magadha, Vanga, Anga, Mathura, and even southern India, we see the peopling of India from the south to the north. So that kind of thing is very interestingly shown even in this passage of iron from south to north. Then they told us that chariots were brought into India by the Aryans. Don't ask how they crossed the Khyber Pass. You shouldn't ask these kind of questions. But somehow they crossed the Khyber Pass and we got chariots into India. Unfortunately, we find many, many chariots in Sanauli, just to the north of New Delhi. Not one chariot, not two chariots, but a whole set of them have been found. And the archaeologist on duty there is saying, this is not a bullock cart chariot. This is not a donkey cart chariot. This is not any such thing, but this is clearly a horse-driven chariot. And he's also found fighting implements like an armor, helmet of a woman, of a man, and things of this nature. So very clearly we got a warrior culture in Sinauli going to an ancient period of time. And this is tentatively 2200 BCE. And this invalidates the claim that Aryans brought a horse to India. Then we have evidence from climatology that India has gone through a lot of different drought periods. 8,200 years ago, 300 years, 5,900 years ago. I'm interested in this 4,200 years ago when we had 200 years of severe drought. Now imagine this. In India, if the monsoon fails for 1 year, our GDP goes down. If the monsoon fails for 3 years, our poor farmers will commit suicide because they can't repay the loans and enormous problems. Now I want you to imagine 200 years of monsoon failure. 200 years of monsoon failure. Southern India is always a rain-fed river. All rivers, whether it's Krishna, Tungabhadra, Kaveri, all these are by monsoon rains. That's how we get our water. If there's no monsoon, southern India would have been a dust bowl. Life would not have been possible over here. Then in northern India, glacier-fed rivers, all the glaciers would have become thin because there's no snowpack over there, and that too would have become dry. So clearly, we have got a 200-year drought in this Nature paper talks about that caused a puncture to our civilization. And there's a lot of evidence for that. This is a study that came out in 2017 where they tried to see the oxygen-18 isotope. Why oxygen-18? Because typically climate studies, they try to see what is the ratio between actual natural oxygen and the isotopic content. Isotopes are formed when lightning happens. When lightning happens and all this activity of isotopes, just one extra neutron or two extra neutrons. That's all it is. But at any rate, by calibrating these things, they got samples from various areas. They're able to say when are the wet periods and dry periods. These orange bars are the dry periods, and these arrows over here are the wet periods. And this is the time. This is the present time, 2000 current era. This is 2000 BC or 4,000 years ago. We had one of the highest drought periods, as you can see here, 200 years of drought. So even by today's climatology studies, by looking at the remnant isotopic content in caves and other things, we can see this monsoon failure. Then we have got several skeletons have been recovered from Syria where they have tried to see the genetics of them, and there seems to be an affinity to northern India. So this also is in one way talking about this. This is a paper in Science that is talking about the Iceman. Iceman was a specimen they found in the Swiss Alps, a frozen body. They thought a recent murder, but it turned out to be a 5,300-year-old specimen. A lot of studies were done, including what was his last meal, what did he eat. So the stomach revealed a H. pylori bacteria that has got genetic affinity to northern India. Very, very interestingly, so either he had a curry as his last meal or he had some kind of relations with Indians. So something strange going on there. Can you go to the next slide, please? This is an interesting paper that came out in Science in 2019 in Nature. It talks about this humped bull. This is the very familiar bull that we see in Indian villages. It's called Bos indicus or zebu. This paper says a Bronze Age shift, a widespread introgression of zebu Bos indicus from Indus Valley happened with the onset of this current geological age 4,200 years ago by a widespread multi-century drought, meaning that the drought in India I talked about 200 years has led to Indians taking their cattle and settling the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent is the Tigris River Valley, Euphrates River Valley, and Nile. Right? They've settled over there with their cattle. Cattle don't go by themselves. Their owners also are gone with them. So no passports, visas those days, right? Wherever water is, you go and settle down. So that evidence we see over here. Also in an Akkadian seal, we see the Indian buffalo over there. This is in a seal in Paris. And this is a paper by a Russian in 2019 excuse me, who links this zebu cattle with the language dispersal from India, saying this is evidence that language also went out from India in this particular time frame. This is an interesting paper that came out in 2018 from Lucknow, and these researchers tried to see when was paddy grown in India, what is the earliest paddy grown in India, by analyzing the diatoms. Diatoms are unicellular organisms. By looking at them, they could make out some certain studies. And they proposed that 9,000 years ago, paddy was being grown in the Ganga plain. So this invalidates the claim that agriculture came from Turkey into India. Then this very strange study wanted to find out the origins, genetic origins of the common house mice, right? Where did the common house mice come from? So this is from Genome Biology in 2007. This researcher found the ancestor is in India. Ancestor of all the house mice is in India. From India, they go to Madagascar, to Africa, Europe, Asia, Central, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. Even today, we know that if we store food in a granary, like rice in a granary, mice are going to come. And as you go on migrations, the mice also follow you, right? Wherever humans go, mice go along. So even this humble study is indirectly telling us something, that migrations have happened in a certain time frame. This paper came out in 2022 in Scientific Reports. And this tried to analyze the growth of millets. How did millets come to Sumeria? So the oldest millets are these orange, this yellow bars, 3rd millennium, blue is the 2nd millennium, red is the 1st millennium. So all over this region, we see the red millets grown here, and the ancient ones are in India. So through the maritime route, it's gone through the Persian Gulf, and we have this growing over here. So indirectly, even looking at botany, the seeds of the past, we can reconstruct a story here and say it's from India, a contact has gone out to all of these areas. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, I'll jump this. Next slide. Next. 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 Next, 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 next. Okay, so with that, I'm jumping to the antiquity of the Indian people. Next slide, please. So what I've done so far is I've tried to show you what is this whole business of Aryan invasion. We have had a lot of problems in the narration of history. I talked to you about the frameworks that have been imposed in historiography. From there, I went into what this Aryan invasion theory is all about. Then I said I'm going to rebut it with multidisciplinary evidence. I showed you now a range of evidence from different areas, climatology, from archaeology, from paleontology, many areas that disprove this whole notion of Aryan invasion. Now we want to see how ancient are the Indian people. And we have a lot of evidence. I'm not going to go over here, but these two talks of mine summarize a lot on archaeology and paleontology. We have got evidence of human presence in India. Artifacts are there from 1 million years ago, for example. In Tamil Nadu, we got hand axes over there that probably are from a specimen called Homo erectus. We got a skull from Narmada Valley that has been dated 350,000 years ago. Now, the common saying is modern Homo sapien came to India from Africa around 90 to 70,000 years ago, which means the earliest specimens in India must not be Homo sapien. So what distinguishes us from the earlier samples? The cranial capacity. So the cranial capacity of Homo erectus, for example, is 1000 cubic centimeters. Ours is close to 1500 cc. The specimen in Narmada Valley was 1400 cc, cubic centimeters. So it's not Homo erectus. Who exactly is this person? That's the question. Then Athiram Pakkam in Tamil Nadu, they found specialized stone tools on 350 to 150,000 years ago, showing superior planning capability. If you had to make stone tools of the kind seen there, previous slide please. Previous. Yes. So we are seeing that the specialized tools imply a superior cranial capacity. So our question is, who are these people making these well-planned cutting tools in India, various kinds of cutting tools in India? So that question came about. Then 40,000 years ago, Bhimbetka, elsewhere, we got cave art that is showing some human presence. Then Pumpuhar, Professor Ramaswamy of Bharatidasan University, he's showing that there are underwater settlements in Bay of Bengal, 15 kilometers out, 400 feet below, 125 meters below. He has found evidence through sonar and remotely operated vehicles. He has found evidence of artificial harbor there, including man-made artifacts. Very, very interesting. Published just a couple of years ago. Then 10,000 years ago, we got Edakal in Kerala, which shows signs of writing. Birana in Rakigari, we talked about that. Underwater artifacts in Dwaraka 8,000 years ago, and a whole lot of recent ones from Harappa, Saraswati, Ganga Plains, Kuradi, Arikamedu, Pattanam. We got a lot of evidence. Next slide, please. If we look at genetics, genetics also says we are a pretty ancient people. So in the 90s and 2000s, people studied genetics by looking at mtDNA, maternal mitochondrial DNA, as well as a Y chromosomal DNA. So we see over here that the earliest markers, genetic markers, L0 to L6, are all in Africa for the Homo sapien from 200,000 years ago. Out of Africa, the earliest markers are M and N. M and N markers are in India. And all the remaining populations, all the remaining non-African populations are derived from the Indian DNA, according to this map over here. That's what we see. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this map shows you that L0 to L6 are in Africa. Here's the map for this. Orange is 200,000 years ago. This black line is 90,000 years ago. So the current theory says 90,000 years ago, a group of people left here, came to India, N and M, and this R, and they go populate Europe, and they populate Southeast Asia up to Australia, and these people join and go to North and South America. So the current thinking is population of the world happened through India. Next slide, please. The same story is there in the Y chromosome. It's not a surprise, right? Women can't do it alone. So you have A00 to C is all in Africa. The F, G, H, I, J, K, L, and R are all in India. And all the lineages are out of India over here. This map shows you the same thing. Different ages over here. You're seeing that big mess over here. This is the group out of Africa, and from India you see the male population lineage going to all of these places. Next slide, please. So this shows you what Oppenheimer tried to show in a pictorial form. Next slide. So he says that mtDNA studies out of Africa approximately 90,000 years ago, these people hugged the coast of India going up to Sumatra and elsewhere. Next slide. Then 74,000 years ago, there was a super volcano in Sumatra, and that covered India and Pakistan with 5 meters deep ash. And you can see that this is in Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, Kurnool district. Even today, excavators are finding that volcano ash in that area. And bottom line is, it caused an instant nuclear winter and a 1,000-year ice age because so much of particulate matter was put in the atmosphere, covered out the sunlight, and you had winter happening over here. That led to a population crash to less than 10,000 adults. This means that if this theory is what we're going to take, you and I are present here because our ancestor was in that 10,000 people who lived there. So all the non-African peoples have descended from this group who survived this event over here. Next slide. Okay, I got it. So we see that repopulation of India took place after that from both sides. Next slide. Then 65,000 years ago, the ice ages ended in Europe, coinciding with the dying of the Neanderthals. When the Neanderthals died, that vacuum was filled by Homo sapiens from this part of India, crossing the Bosphorus and becoming the future Proto-Europeans. Next slide. And by 45 to 40,000 years ago, we see people from eastern part of India, western part of India, from Sumeria, from Taiwan, other places going to Central Asia. Next slide. They cross the Bering Strait and become the future North and South Americans. So this is the picture that we see from mtDNA studies. Next slide. This is a recent paper that came out in May 2023. So in Laos, they found evidence that the settlement over there was 86,000 years ago. They had settled Laos, mind you, after coming to India and settling over there, but they feel that that date must be pushed back by almost 20,000 years, which means in India also the date must probably be pushed back by 20,000 years. Next slide. I don't expect you to read all these things. A lot of initial studies was done by trying to see who are the Indians genetically. Initial studies used a mathematical means called fixation index. What does that mean? If I take the genetic markers that each of us have in this room, and I make a basket and put all the genetic markers, we may have different markers, right? Then the issue is, if I have a standard marker with all these, marker means a location in the chromosome where these things are, I can define a distance, a genetic distance between you and whether you have that marker or not. So by looking at these FST markers for people from different parts of India, our hope is we can say, yes, this is the North Indian population, South Indian population, Brahmin population, Kshatriya population, all these kind of things. But the reality is that they found the Indian population is so mixed, you cannot cluster it. There's no clustering possible, whether it was done in Uttarakhand, whether it was done in Andhra Pradesh, whether it was done in Karnataka, whether it was done over all Indian populations, all of them came with the same results. Different studies saying you cannot take the modern Indian population and say these are what they are. This shows that this whole racial nonsense of Aryans and Dravidians is utterly bogus, right? There's nothing at the genetic level that will tell you what you are. Race is a social construct. It is not a scientific word. It is not based in science. If somebody says we are a race, you need to ask them what are the genetic markers. If somebody says this is Aryan Dravidian, or this is an Aryan gene, is there a Dravidian gene? Or if somebody says Chaturvarna giving rise to all these things, you ask, is there a Brahmin gene? Is there a Kshatriya gene? No, we have not found any of these. After years and years of studying, nobody has found any of these things. Next slide, please. So some people said that R1A, which is found in Scandinavia, as well as in Uttar Pradesh, as well as a little bit in the Tocharian places, they said this is indicative of the language migration. So a whole lot of attention was paid to that, where people tried to see where did R1A originate. It's a male lineage. So people tried Basho, 2003, Kevisil, Cordio, Sengupta, different studies over here. And for R1A, some people said Central Asia, Southern Asia, Central Asia, North India, Southern Asia, South Asia, Northwest India, South Asia, and so on. So there's not a consensus, but most of the people seem to lean towards India is probably the place where even this mutation arose. Next slide, please. In 2018, David Reich tried to do genome-wide studies. Genome-wide studies means instead of just looking at the gender chromosomes, we have got 23 pairs of chromosomes, right? So they just look at the 23rd gender chromosome, X and Y. Instead of that, why don't we look at the 22 autosomes also for hints of migration? So by 2010 or so, the technology had progressed to a point where they could do these studies. So he came about from Harvard Medical School saying that 7000 BCE, Iranian agriculturists came and settled in India, becoming the ASI, Ancestral South Indian, and the Ancestral North Indian, to which this also added after 3000 BC, this Aryan invasion. So this was his model on how India was populated with the ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian. That was his model. Excuse me. However, in 2018, I contested this. I was going around India giving a lot of talks, and one of the talks I put up in that archaeology slide, the second one, you can go and refer to that. I said the Vedas and the Puranas are talking in Dasaragnya. When Dasaragnya happens, you have the Anu and the Drihyu who leave India and go outwards. Where is that shown, genetic signature shown here? That is not present here. I said Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu Purana, Vayu Purana, Brahmanda Purana, Matsya Purana, Rig Veda, they all talk about that. Am I going to discard all of the citation that we have in the Indian tradition and believe the study from Harvard Medical School that was based on a few data points? I said, no, red flag has gone up, there's a problem, I can't trust this. Also, he said the Saraswati River had dried up in 1900 BCE. We had a monsoon failure for 200 years in 2000 BCE. At that time, Indians went and settled in the Fertile Crescent. Where does your genetic signature show that? That doesn't show up over here. I said, sorry, some problem over here. So when I gave these talks in 2018, I said, as an engineer, I do sensitivity analysis. If I do, these are all mathematical studies, by the way. If I do a mathematical study, if I converge to an answer, I will take some data points out, put some of the data points in, and see do I converge to the same answer. If I converge to the same answer, that means I have a robust answer. If I converge to a different answer, that means my earlier result depended strongly on those few data points. That is not a robust theory. We should discard that. That is what I suggested there. Next slide, please. Surprisingly, in 2019, David Rice published one more paper where he added 11 more samples from Iran into the mathematical problem. And when they ran their optimization studies, it converged to a different answer where he retracted his earlier findings. These two are gone. So in this 2019 paper, they say this earlier thing is gone, but he's still sticking on to the Aryan invasion, that there's an Aryan invasion to India. As of 2019, this is what people are saying. Next slide, please. So this is what I used to talk about in 2018 itself, that my confidence level with ancestral genetics methodology is like this, it goes down. The presence or absence of a genetic marker is not a problem. I can go here and take your DNA, for example, and say that you have these markers, I have these markers. That's a fact. You can go to a lab and see that, no dispute about that. But then if I say in this room, 20% of the people belong to this persuasion and the 50% belong to that, that is where it's subjective. I have some problems coming in over there and direction of genetic flow. But then if I say over here, 50% of the people have got ancestry from Central Asia, that is bogus, utterly bogus. And so I've shown very low confidence over there because there are issues with the models, methodology, data, sampling methods, and the claims. So these are the issues that I identified. Next slide, please. And believe it or not, after making many such talks, this paper came out in 2022. And this man says exactly what I said in 2018 talk. He said all these works are bogus. He said that PCA, principal component analysis findings, are highly biased and must be reevaluated. So I had said at that time that you can give me PCA is based on something called a matrix where you put some numbers over there and you do something called singular value decomposition. And I said I can load it any way I like. If I take, for example, supposing there is one population and another population. If I take more samples from this population and less from here, I can skew my results towards this. That's the nature of that work. So I said this is all subjective. Your population size, your sampling methods, all that had to be scrutinized over here. And that is what this man is saying. We demonstrate PCA results can be easily manipulated to generate desired outcomes. And he says it raises concern about validity of results reported in population genetics literature. He concludes it will have biasing roles and 32,000 genetic studies should be re-evaluated. That is the conclusion of this man. Very, very strong. This is a paper I did not write. I talked about it, but I should have written this paper. Anyway, that's what this one is saying. Next slide. Okay, I got it. So this is a slide that shows the spread of farming. Neolithic means farming has been invented, but there are some issues in the way this is shown. This shows that Anatolia, 9,600 years before present, this is where they say farming started and moved into Europe in this manner. These are all the years before present. And they also questionably show it moved into India. I put big question marks here saying there's a problem. The reality is it is an out of India going in this manner. That is what is revealed. And for evidence, let's take a look at the Cell paper. Next slide, please. This is a paper that came out from Cell by Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, and others. After many years of trying to get DNA from Harappa specimen, they finally got the DNA, sent it off to South Korea for analysis, and this is the result of that paper. So they showed something called an Indus Valley clan with some percentage of Andamanese hunter-gatherer with a common ancestor going before 10,000 BCE. And by the time you come over here, Iranian hunter-gatherer. Now, this terminology needs some explanation. So you have very ancient people who we call hunter-gatherers, right? After hunter-gatherer, the next stage in evolution is you become a herder. Herder is you have some cattle and other such things. The next stage in evolution is you become a farmer. So they see the Iranian hunter-gatherers about 10,000 BC are 100% this orange color, Indus Valley people. Then when you come down to 8,000 BC, the Iranian herders are also 100% the same. By the time you come to 4,000 BC, farmers, they have 70% Indic content and about 30% Anatolian content. So what is this saying? This is saying it's out of India, right? It's showing it's an out of India movement coming in over here. So that is as far as the antiquity is concerned. I've thrown a great number of slides over here to try and show you about what science is telling about these things. Now I'd like to show you antiquity seen in Indian astronomy. Next slide, please. So Indian astronomy, we know what it's all about, but the colonialists, when they came, these are the guys who tried to analyze it, Cassini, Lee Gentle, Euler, Bailey, and others. So everybody has shown in a white font. When they encountered this, there was no controversy. They took the Indian results for what they were. They said that Indian astronomy shows great antiquity, so great antiquity they couldn't even believe it. But then William Jones came along and started the controversy because he's the one who said there is a relationship between Sanskrit, Latin and Greek because there is an Aryan invasion into India. If there's an Aryan invasion into India, then there's a problem with your astronomy. How can your astronomy be so old? So therein, everybody in red font now disputes the antiquity of Indian astronomy because of the linguistics model. They want to uphold the linguistics model. Both can't be right. Linguistics model is saying into India in 1500 BCE. Astronomy model is saying great antiquity in India. Both can't be right. So they have preferred to create a controversy here on how old is the Indian astronomy, where did it originate, what did they learn from the Greeks, what did they learn from Babylonians. They pretended that Indian astronomy is not old. Rather, they copied from Babylonians and Greeks. That's how this kind of notion came about. Next slide, please. So this is the model of Indian astronomy, nakshatras and Rashi. So we got the various nakshatras, Chitra, Vishaka, Jeshta, in the outer circle. And the moon, the lunar month was associated with the full moon. If the full moon appears in the Chitra nakshatra, that is the Chaitra Masa. In northern India, it's a full moon. In southern India, it's a new moon, Purni Amanta month or the Amanta month. That's why we see Chaitra Masa here with an offset over here. This is northern India, southern India. We also followed the solar calendar. To follow the path of the sun, the sky was divided into 12 segments of 30 degrees each. They were the Rashi model. So we had the nakshatra and the Rashi model. Next slide, please. This is a listing of all the nakshatra names in two of our old books, Vedanga Jyotisha, Surya Siddhanta, and what that star associated with it is. When the British came to India, they asked the Pandits each of which is that nakshatra, and they identified that with their constellations. Kritika's Eta Tauri, Rohini's Alpha Tauri, Mrigashirsha, Lambda Orionis, and so on. So we can identify today what those stars are in each of those nakshatras. Next slide, please. This one shows the nakshatra names in different parts of the country. What you see is in Sanskritam, Telugu, Kannada, Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi. The names are the same almost in all the languages except there is some slight differences. For example, in Tamil and Malayalam, Ardra becomes Thiruvadirai and Ashlesha becomes Ailiyam and things like this. This tells us, yes ma'am?
That is because they follow this Saura Mandala.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, but the point I wanted to make was because the antiquity of the calendar is so ancient that there are regional divergences. It's like today we have a word like computer. Computer enters Indian languages as computer. But maybe 200 years from now, Kannada will have a special word for computer, Tamil will have something else. There's a divergence happening. So we are seeing divergences in the names because of the antiquity of this calendar, the regional divergences. Next slide, please. So in order to understand Indian astronomy and antiquity, we must understand these cycles. These are called Milankovitch cycles that are eccentricity, precision and tilt. Earth goes through a cycle through the sun where it becomes elliptical to circular in 100,000 years. That is a cycle. The axial precession, where we are pointing to, the axis of rotation is pointing to a star in the sky. In Bangalore, I think it is 19 degrees, if I'm not mistaken, so it's somewhere over here. In Houston, it's somewhere over here, 29 degrees. So it looks like the Earth is rotating about this point. If you go to the North Pole, it is 90 degrees. It looks like the Earth is rotating there. If you go to Jaffna, it is like at the equator, Earth is rotating as if it's lying on its back and rotating. So this is the axis of rotation is where we are pointing to. And this axis of rotation is tracing a path in the sky that takes 26,000 years to complete. This is happening, this wobble, we call it a wobble, because of the gravitational action of Jupiter, Moon, Sun, Moon, and Jupiter to some extent. That is causing Earth to wobble over here. Another cycle is a change in obliquity, where from 21 degrees we go to 24 degrees in 41,000 years. So Milankovitch was a Serbian scientist who proposed cycles of ice ages and drought happen because of the amount of radiant energy we get from the sun as a consequence of these three cycles. This is one of the most successful scientific theories we've had. If you look at the ice core records in Greenland or in Antarctica, it follows this theory so well. It is amazing how well it followed this. But for us, we are interested in this guy. Because whenever our ancestors marked the beginning of the New Year was vernal equinox for us. When vernal equinox happened, they said, what was the nakshatra at the vernal equinox point? That nakshatra position will not remain because of precession. Because of precession, it keeps changing over time. Over thousands of years, that point changes. So we can work backwards precisely knowing this uniform precision rate, we can tell when an observation was made. Next slide, please. So one of the things we can try that with is the antiquity of Vedanga Jyotisha. Several people tried to fix the antiquity of this one. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So over here, we see that in Vedanga Jyotisha, it says winter solstice occurred when the sun and moon came together in Dhanishta Nakshatra. Now that is an archaeo-astronomical data point. So we can now try to see at winter solstice point what happened, what is a nakshatra, and how far back in time should we go for Dhanishta to be there at the winter solstice point. Next slide, please. So here what I'm showing is a projection of Earth's latitudes and longitudes in the sky, where they become celestial coordinates. So this here is the celestial North Pole. This is the horizon line, the ground line. Everything below is the day sky, everything above the night sky, and this is the ground line over here. And these circles are the latitudes projected to the sky and longitudes. So this is 90 degrees, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. On Earth, 0 is the equator. In the sky, it is a celestial equator. Then if this is the celestial equator, this is minus 10, minus 20, minus 24. That is the winter solstice point. When the sun goes to minus 24, in the northern hemisphere, we got winter. So when winter solstice happened, in this longitude, we have Dhanishta. In order to get this, I had to go in the planetarium software to 1440 BCE. So by going to 1440 BCE, we can simulate this condition when Dhanishta is at the winter solstice point. That tells you the antiquity of Vedanga Jyotisha. Next slide, please. Previous. Okay, next slide. Then all of us have heard about the Dhruva story, right? Dhruva had an unhappy childhood, so his father married a younger woman, and his life became a miserable story. He tried to sit on the lap of his father, younger wife shoos him away. He cries to his mother, where is my place in the universe? She propounds a karma theory, and finally he goes off to do tapasya. He wants to ask Bhagavan Vishnu, where is my place in the universe? He meets the Saptarishis, they teach him how to do tapasya. Then finally Bhagavan comes, asks him, what do you want? He's in a state of bliss, he wants nothing. Bhagavan says, I'll make you into a motionless star in the sky after your time. So this is an idea of the axis of rotation. That star does not move. You see in the sky, that star is fixed in the sky where the axis of rotation is pointing. And he said, even the Saptarishis will go in pradakshina around you. That is your place in the heavens. That is your place. But that is not all. As you can see here, he said, Dhruva, you will go here and you will abide there for a kalpa. He also said, your mother, Sumati, she will abide near you for a similar term. So he said, not only will you be there, Sumati will also be, your mother will also be close to you. And this is there in Vishnu Purana, book 1, chapter 12. Next slide, please. We can simulate that. In today's time, this is our Dhruva, Dhruva's Polaris. This is the celestial pole, and we see that there is no companion nearby for Dhruva. But if we crank back in time to 2800 BC, Thuban became the pole star and it's got a companion nearby. So when Vishnu Purana was written, and we attribute the Puranas to Vedavyasa, right? All the Mahapuranas are Vedavyasa. So when he did this, at that time the pole star was Thuban and there was this companion star nearby. At no other period of time this is true. Only here you have a companion star. So from Vishnu Purana, we can detect that the age of the story is this one. And what does this say about Aryan invasion of 1400, 1500 BC to this date? Next slide, please. Yajnavalkya, he wrote Shatapatha Brahmana. So this Rishi is telling the Vedic practitioner how to find the east direction. East is not, wherever the sun rises is not east, because sun goes from plus 23 degrees to minus 23 degrees, right? Winter and summer solstice. So we can't have east here, 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 and here. That is wrong. It is true east when the sun is in the celestial equator. When it's in the celestial equator, we got equinox. That is the date of, that's a true east direction. So Yajnavalkya is saying, Kritika Nakshatra does not move from the eastern quarter, therefore the Rishi may light his Yajna fires under the Kritika Nakshatra. That is what he's saying in this Shatapatha Brahmana. Next slide, please. So now we have to see when was Kritika heliacal rising, meaning rising with the sun when it was equinox point. So over here, this is 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. 0 is the celestial equator. This is the ground line. Sun is on the celestial equator, and there's Kritika Nakshatra over here. So the Vedic practitioner would have woken up before sun rises, when it's still dark, have your ritual bath, come outside and say, I see Kritika over there in the horizon. 1 hour later, the sun rises over the eastern horizon, washes out Kritika, you can't see it. But I have a straight line. I have one point there, another point there. So I set up all the bricks over here and start my Homa fires over here. You see how it works? So this was possible only in 2982 BCE, if we follow the prescription given Shatapatha Brahmana. So we know that Rishi Yajnavalkya lived in this time frame probably over here. Next slide, please. Then we have an ancient epoch encoded in our tables, right? We got Puranas talking about Kali Yuga, Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta, Pulisa Siddhanta, Brahmagupta. In Karnataka, Aihole temple epigraphy in Chalukyas, we see this. Cassini was an astronomer, a mathematician, who got some astronomical tables from Thailand, the Siam tables. So he analyzed these tables and he said that it's got the longitude of Benares encoded over there and an absolute date of 3102 BCE encoded into it. Later on, Playfair, Bentley, Colebrook, all these people studied the same epoch by the data given in Surya Siddhanta. And they too inferred that it's in 3102 BC, February 18th. And this turns out to be a conjunction of the planet, sun and moon and Revati Nakshatra. Next slide, please. I simulated this, and you can see that if the sun is here in Revati Nakshatra, you have Chandra over here, and you, on top of each other you have Jupiter and Shukran, which is Venus over here. You have Mangala, Mars, Buddhan, Mercury, Shani, which is Saturn. Everything is clustered over here. This clustering in Revati Nakshatra only happened in 3102 BCE. And this is referenced throughout. Even today, devout Hindus who do their prayers say how many days have elapsed from Kali Yuga onwards. They do this. So, amazing marker. Next slide, please. All of this now story of Aditi. Aditi with her co-sister Diti, she with Rishi Kashyapa gave rise to all the Devas and the Daityas and so on. Next slide, please. In Aitreya Brahmana, we have a passage to Aditi. And this passage says, the sacrifice, which is a yajna, this went away from the Devatas. The Devatas did not know how to perform any ceremony. Remember, in India, we've always followed the celestial calendar to form any festival, any yajna, everything is done with the celestial calendar. Now, what it is saying is the Devas did not know how to perform the ceremony. They did not know where it had gone to. They said to Aditi, let us know the sacrifice through thee. Aditi said, Tadastu, let it be so. But I will choose a boon from you. They said, choose. She said, all sacrifices shall commence with me and end with me. Very cryptic, right? You can't make out what this means. But then brilliant Balagangadhar Tilak, he saw this and said this is an archaeo-astronomical phenomena. It is referring to a time when our ancestors were unable to perform any religious sacrifice because of precision. The same precision over thousands of years, the calendar, whatever is supposed to be in the vernal equinox, is no longer there. So they don't know what is the correct day to do this particular Homa and other such things. So they're saying they did not know where it had gone to. And they have reset the calendar to Aditi. Aditi is saying the new year will begin and end with me. Begin and end with me. That is the idea. That's what is cryptically said over here. Next slide, please. So we have to see when did the vernal equinox happen in Punarvashu Nakshatra. Why Punarvashu Nakshatra? Because Punarvashu Nakshatra has got Diti and Aditi, two stars. This is Aditi, this is Diti. In the Greek tradition, we call this Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are Diti and Aditi in Indian tradition. So to do this, I had to crank it back to 6000 BCE. If you go to 6000 BCE, Sun is on the celestial equator over here, and the longitude is of these two stars. Staggering. 8,000 years ago, Aitriya Brahmanas referencing something that our ancestors were struggling to make sense of the sky in this time frame. Next slide, please. Surya Siddhanta is talking about a great conjunction, the Mesha Rashi, which is Aries, and this is the clustering they're talking about. The date can be fixed to 6779 BCE. Next slide, please. Everybody knows the story of the Ashwins, right? So the Ashwins, we know the Surya story. So one fine day in the Surya household, there was a problem because Surya had become so bright. He became so bright and brilliant, his wife could not take the heat. So Sanjana abandons her husband and goes off to the cooler region. But she leaves a shadow, Chaya, in her place. So one fine day, Surya discovers a deception and asks, where is my wife? And she says that she's gone to the cooler region. So Surya also adopts, searches for the cooler region. He finds she's taken the form of a horse, so even he takes the form of a horse. And as a result of that union, the Ashwini Kumaras are born. These are traditional healers in India. Then we have got very, very interesting statements in the Rig Veda. One of those Rig Vedic statements says, Ushas, who's Ushas? She's the goddess of dawn. Ushas awaken the Ashwinis for their share of the Vedic sacrifice. You don't awaken a grown-up man. You awaken babies. So Ushas awaken the Ashwinis for their share of the Vedic sacrifice, meaning that Ashwini Nakshatra is in the winter solstice. Why winter solstice? Because sun has gone to the cooler region. That means it's winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. Next slide, please. So to simulate this, we again go to minus 23.3 when it is in the Ashwini Nakshatra over here. This date is 7200 BCE, staggering amount of time. I also request you to search for my story called Once Upon a Time, 9,000 years ago in rajvedam.medium.com. I've shown a fascinating correlation of the story with a couple of papers that came out in Nature just last year. There's a paper that talked about a solar flare 9,000 years ago that was so brilliant. So that story I have correlated to this independent archaeoastronomical artifact, saying this is not fiction. Our ancestors experienced something out of the ordinary, and they recounted this, the story of Surya, Sanjana, and others. And this evidence I've shown in this particular work, which you can see. Next slide, please. So with this, we can make a rebuttal to Aryan invasion. We have got many instances of interest which we can encode with astronomical observations, date of Kali Yuga, dates in Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads. With astronomy, we can show great antiquity and ask the question, how can Vedic concepts be in place if the Aryans only came to India in 1500 BC? We got a big problem over here. Next slide, please. So with this, we can rebut Max Muller's chronology. Max Muller said we have a Chandas period where 1200 BC to 1000 BC when the Rig Veda was composed. Mantra period, remaining books. Brahmana period, 800 to 600 BC when Samaveda, Aranyakas, Upanishads. Sutra period up to 200 BC when the Vedangas and others were composed, including Vedanga Jyotisha. But then we have got, Colebrooke himself said Vedanga Jyotisha is 1400 BCE. We had Shatapatha Brahmana, Kritika, 2982 BCE. We had Rig Veda stories of Aditi and Ashwinis to 7200 BCE. Where are these dates and where is this linguistic analysis dates? So clearly we have a problem. If the linguistic analysis is correct, then our ancestors have done some amazing thing by backdating their astronomy. Or these dates are actually experienced by our ancestors, remembered in our cultural memory, and the linguistic analysis is nonsense. We only have two options, this or that. Next slide, please. So today, Max Muller was confronted in Europe by his fellow Europeans who said, should all of Indian chronology be held hostage to biblical chronology? This man got so upset, he wrote this entire book, on Hindu astronomy, in which he said he's going to discard all of the Indian works. He said they were all unreliable. I'm not going to select any of them, not going to make anything on that. Today we know that is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is your belief. He believed the creation date of 4004 BCE, Bible's creation date. He believed in, excuse me, 1500 BC Aryans, because Colebrook, a fellow European, had said that. He accepted that because it was after the Aryan invasion. He accepted that. He believed Aryans invaded India in 1500 BC, but he ignored all these facts and evidence as unreliable. So today, when we only take the data points we want and discard the others, it's clearly confirmation bias, a failed methodology. So clearly, today's academia, which follows this, follows a failed methodology in addition. Next slide, please. So overall, I have shown to you an out-of-India transmission. Rather, I have not shown to you on this. My next talk in Jain University will focus on these things, where I will show consistent with an ancient civilization. If we are an ancient civilization, we must have evidence of great accumulation of knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, arts, music, everything, you name it, we must have accumulation. In line with that, I've shown great accumulation of works in the Indian civilization and transmission to various parts of the world. With evidence, I've shown transmission to Sumeria, 3000 BC, Fertile Crescent in this time frame, to Armenia, to Hittites and Minoans, Greek philosophers, to Islamic transmissions, Indo-Roman trade, Islamic transmissions to Toledo, Europe, as well as the colonial transmissions. So we can conclusively show not only this, but transmission to the East also, to China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia. So India truly has been a Vishwaguru, not because something special about us, but because this is an ancient civilization where we've had comparative prosperity and peace because of dharmic ideas, Vedanta ideas. We have not had fights with each other and so on. So we've had a lot of knowledge growing over a long period of time, and India is a destination for most people to learn as well as to trade, because of which we had diffusion of Indian ideas to other places too. Those are the things I highlight in this particular talk. Next slide, please. So in my concluding remarks, the deep history of India is utterly wrong. Whatever we teach our students, it's a criminal distortion what we teach our children. And 5 agencies have enforced their ideology and frameworks controlling the history of India: colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist, Nehruvian ideas, which the UPA continues, to the Marxists. Linguistic methodology is used to uphold their narratives. It does not align with evidence I've shown from many other fields, therefore it is falsified. We have seen antiquity of humans in archaeology, in genetics, in astronomy, material evidence from archaeology, and we have strong evidence to uphold the antiquity of Indian civilization. So what I've done for you is to show you an evidence-based narration. Everything that I've said has been backed by published evidence from various fields. Nothing I've said is my opinion alone, but inferred from the facts arising from these papers over here. It discredits the Aryan invasion migration theory that constrains Indian chronology. Today, each of us have got this chains on our head of Aryan invasion. Because of that, we cannot reconcile the facts of our civilization. But if you break those shackles, break those chains and throw them off, then we can reconcile all these facts very, very nicely and easily. So that is what we see from all of these works. So with that, I come to the end of my talk. Next slide, please. And the next slide. So go back, please. So that is the end of my talk. So thank you very much. As many as needed.
ನೀವು ಹೊರಡು
ಸರಿ ಓಕೆ.
ಸಮಯಾಭಾವ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ 2 ಅಥವಾ 3 ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನು ತಗೋಬೋದು ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
Anybody? Yes, please. Please state your name and your affiliation, and you can ask your question.
Namaste. My name is Venkatraman. Thank you for a great talk. For the past about 150-200 years, whatever we have been told or has been propagated, it has become an institution and a power center by itself. Peer reviews will be done only by them,
Right.
not by us.
Right.
They have become the gatekeepers of our history. That is the truth.
Right.
before even we are attempting to do that, there is another wave which is happening, which you touched upon, the Proto-Indo-European, with no proof, no evidence. There are people who are constructing a whole new language and making it as if there was a language that was existing like that.
Yes, please come to your question, yes.
How do you stop that? Because this cycle we have missed. In the next wave, it has started already.
So this happened in 1800s, sir. The linguistic analysis is 1800s, not now. But bottom line, I said there are 5 frameworks controlling the historiography of India. From the colonial, missionary, and the Eurocentric, they set the wave, which is now inherited by the Western academia. And in India, Nehruvian socialism and Marxism, they control the historiography to the present day. So 5 agencies conspiring with Islamo-leftism today have conspired to control the narrative of the Indian civilization, therefore your identity. So how do you fight them? There's enormous amount of money flowing in to make these organizations do what they're doing. They hold the narrative tightly to their chest. So if you have to pry their hands and take the narrative out, it's not possible. Each time Indians try to take adhikara for the narrative, you are denied the agency. They immediately say you're saffron, you're fascist, you're Hindutva. They will not confront any of the facts that we present. They're not even qualified to talk in science, let alone these things. So bottom line, they demonize you rather than to address you. The way to change it is to have a surgical strike, just like PM Modi had done that. We need to have a surgical strike on our education system. We need to make sure that we purge the entire ecosystem of learning from the Nehruvian socialists and the Marxists. Once that is done, then we see it's very simple. Any rational person will say these 5 agencies that control the historiography of India: colonial, missionary, Marxist, socialist, and others. The 6th person is the indict practitioner. Why is he not at the table? Why is this person denied a place at the table to state the history of India? Isn't that bigotry? For 50 years, we have isolated the Indian scholar out, and these scholars languish in Sanskrit colleges in poverty all over India. They have been pushed out of this whole statement over here. So we need to get the Indic scholar in, and the Indic scholar needs to be aware of the statements coming from these people, and then we can rebut it with evidence like I've shown. So we need to fight our way for the table. It can happen, but a lot of intelligentsia needs to get together and make this happen. Force our politicians to be cognizant of this and make it an election issue in 2024 maybe, and make it happen.
My name is M.N. Ramesh. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. And basically, you have been propagating so strongly, have you ever tried to put these facts in front of those who are in the government to at least change the history, what we have been teaching to our children for centuries? And I think this is the time now when the new education policy is coming in place. So this is the time that this has to be pushed in. So what is the way forward? Can you please throw some light?
So I have a regular day job to put the bread and butter on my table as an engineer, and I work. I do this on my vacation time where I can communicate these concepts not only in India, in USA also. I do my workshops, I do talks to raise awareness, but it requires a community. It requires you and many others to walk along with me, perhaps, and other thought leaders, Rajiv Malhotra, Subhash Kak. So many giants are out there. So we need to walk with them. Their journey should become our journey. How can we support them? How can you raise a profile? I don't have political connections. I don't have any industrial corporate connections, but many of you might have that. So how can you exercise those connections to get to the people in power and make these things happen? It requires a community. So it requires that all of us who are affected by this boycotted narrative of Bharatiya civilization, if we feel strongly about it, come together, make it happen, make it happen. I'm just one person doing it, a private citizen at that. I'm not commissioned by anybody to do this. So let's make it happen with more and more people doing so. I would love it if somebody says, I know the Chief Secretary, or I know Prime Minister Modi. I'll get you an interview over there, and let's make it happen. And I shouldn't be carrying the burden either. There should be somebody like a project manager saying, let's work together, put a team to revise the textbooks, do this, carry on this conversation or conference and things like that, and make it happen. Make it happen. Don't expect the thought leaders like myself, I don't want to call myself that, but people who are doing the research and carrying out these things should not carry the entire burden. That should not happen. Society must carry that burden.
Hello. Good evening, sir.
Yes.
I am Vishnu. Sir, past 75 years, our education system is followed Macaulay education system. My brother and sister studied Macaulay education system.
All of us.
They teach Western civilization is great, Indian culture is worst.
Right.
All my brother and sister learn from. Because I am very sad about that education system.
Right.
We have right true history.
Right.
Still you present the facts.
Mm-hmm.
That is my ambition.
Right, thank you for
Thank
the
you so
observation. Yeah, I think we need to take pride in our regional languages. In our languages, we recognize the constitution, because every language is a repository, rich repository of culture, folklore, dance, literature, and so on. Unless we take pride in these things and propagate our knowledge in these areas, it's very difficult to get rid of Macaulayan thoughts. We continue. I'm talking to you in English, for example. Ideally, you should have been talking in Kannada or any other language. Ideally, that should have happened. But my vocabulary itself is not strong enough to communicate all these concepts over there. That is because our education system is like that. So we need to make that change happen. We need to give prominence to our regional languages and make sure that our rich repository in each language, that is carried forward, rather than jingoism and fight between Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, all these kind of problems. These divisions are caused. All my talks, you might have observed, knowledge system goes towards showing that we are a pan-India civilization. Everything that I'm doing is showing there is no Aryan, there is no Dravidian, there is Bharatiya civilization. All my talks are showing that, right? So we need to go towards that. We need to believe that, internalize that, and practice that in every day, respecting each other's language and other such things. Okay.
One observation I wanted to make. One observation I wanted to make, that when I was in Vietnam, just to share with the people here, there is another way to handle with these 5 Rakshasas. One is diplomacy, because he slightly touched on that point. So I started giving books of Shrikant Talgeri, David Frawley, N.S. Rajaram to my ambassador. It is like converting the people who were converting us, mainly the diplomats. So then slowly they started coming into Milo, and there is one, it's a communist country. So religious institution is also there in one big university. So then I approached them, you are doing papers and seminars on Christianity, which is just 2 to 3% in Vietnam, and Buddhism, which cannot be spoken there, and rest of other religions. Why can't you have one seminar or paper on Vedas? So happily the gentleman agreed, the professor. He told nobody came from the embassy. This is where the Modi or anybody's diplomacy plays role in tomorrow. Happily, sir, 2 volumes of research papers they have brought from one religious institute in Vietnamese language, completely in support of the Bharatiya narration. This point is also can be taught, and whoever is having the foreign connections in diplomacies or in our embassies, whoever in whichever capacity, if they can connect to people like Dr. Raj Vedam in terms of arranging a talk with the ambassadors, with the diplomats, then I think that will go a long way, because we prepare our children for IAS and finally they will go into IAS and IFS, and whatever the work is given to them, they will do it. But the content part, they can't do it, because they are into the administration. If somebody gives them a content which we think is scientific and proper, there are takers now. Thank you.
Okay, it's time for my next engagement. So maybe I'll take your one question and I'll stop with that.
No questions, sir. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for an excellent, wonderful, fascinating talk. I enjoyed it. Though I had read most of it, but your presentation was mind-boggling. Now, I just out of curiosity, I am asking you. When you are presenting these papers in foreign universities where these things are established and you are coming out with such overwhelming evidence, how do they receive you or your papers? Just curiosity, I want to know.
One thing is I found people don't engage. When they know the contents of what you want to do, if they don't have an answer for you, they won't even engage. So I become a non-person, non-grata, persona non grata in that sense. Or I've had an instance where the Greek professors in some of my presentations who did not like what I was talking about the Greek civilization, and they present a history the way it is taught to them, which is also corrupted and wrong. And I had to painstakingly say that's not the case. So sometimes there are some engagements, but sometimes people just don't engage you. In this country itself, for example, for India, I have come several times to give workshops to textbook writers in a particular state, which involve the state textbook writers as well as NCERT professors. Many professors who belong to leftist persuasion and otherwise. Several of them refused to come. They would write to the directorate of textbooks saying they're either sick or they're traveling, they have a conference and so on. So twice it happened. I came to India twice for the workshops, twice it happened. Third time I came, she gave an ultimatum. If you don't come, I'm going to accept all of Vedam's recommendations and changes will come. Then I had a couple of professors who came to the presentation, NCERT. One of them sat through the entire presentation after one day, whole day of talking, and then he had nothing to say. Because all science-based, he had nothing to say. The other one was a little more honest. He said that, look, I'm not going to change my textbook just because you have a new theory. I want to see more people talk about the same thing, then I will change. I can respect that because he's not sure about it. He will wait for consensus from multiple authors, then he will change it. So, but he made an empty gesture. He said, come to New Delhi and talk to us at NCERT. That never happened. All right, thank you very much.
ಈಗ ವಂದನಾರ್ಪಣೆ ಆಡಳಿತ ಮಂಡಳಿ ಸದಸ್ಯರಾದ ಶ್ರೀಯುತ ರವಿಯವರಿಂದ. ವಂದನಾರ್ಪಣೆ ನಂತರ ಲಘು ಉಪಹಾರ ಮತ್ತು ಕಾಫಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಸ್ವೀಕರಿಸಿ ಹೊರಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ಕೊಂತ.
It's the right time to thank Dr. Raj Vedam. In fact, with the engineering background, the way he has taken the subject, and particularly in a very methodical, scientific way of analysis. And I think he poured the data so much that probably it is very, very difficult for anybody to get it totally sunk into the brain. But at the same time, I can fully understand that the amount of energy that he has put in, the whole heart and soul, to bring in this theory where it is based on data scientific analysis, that the Aryan invasion or the migration theory is totally nonsense. He made a wonderful statement saying that he has, as a researcher, he has done something, but it's for us to take it forward. I think that's where the crux of the whole thing is. And this is where, as a society, we need to join and see to it that the Bharatiyate that has been established has to be taken further on to see that it comes in our education system in toto and in full. I think on behalf of every one of you and on behalf of Mythic Society, I thank Professor Raj Vedam for his excellent presentation and the excellent research that he has conducted. I only pray God that he gives him more and more energy to come out with more facts. And one day, I think the next generation will see this Bharatiyate in our country. Thank you very much. I request our Professor Kotresh to hand over a small piece of memento on behalf of Mythic Society. I request our Mr. Prasanna, our Managing Committee member, also to kindly join in handing over. I once again thank Dr. Raj Vedam to have come here in spite of his busy schedule. And as he said, he's going to Jain University for one more talk now. And probably tomorrow he's leaving back to USA. His visit has been only for 2 days to India. Yeah. In fact, next year, particularly, I'm talking about the calendar year here. So when you are in India, I request you to join us for one more talk on your latest research work in this line. And once again, I thank, there have been very scholars and very reputed people who have come to today's seminar function. Dr. M.G. Nagaraj, Dr. Devakunda Reddy, Sri Bhaskar Rao, Professor S.R. Leela, Dr. S.K. Aruni, Sri C.B. Patil, K.S. Kannan, Professor Kannan, Dr. G.B. Harish, S.R. Krishnamurthy, and many other scholars who are present here. I thank you, every one of them, for having been here. And I thank everybody for coming on a working day, particularly in the afternoon at 3:30. I thank you very much. Kindly have refreshments before you leave. Thank you very much.